Hello and welcome to my painting channel. Welcome back if you've been here before, and warmest welcomes if this is your first time viewing any of my videos. And on this video we are going to paint a small Games Workshop GRYPH HOUND. So this is going to be a nice, quick, simple, easy to follow painting, and we're going to paint the back half, the lion, tiger, liger type half. We're going to paint as a kind of like a little giraffe sort of effect on it. So we're going to start using a gold brown from Vallejo. This is quite a nice yellow, but it's quite a thick yellow, so this one takes to the miniature quite quickly and quite easily. It also dries down to quite a nice matte effect as well, so this creates a really good sort of base colour and a really good base tone for us to work up from here. So just cover the back part, so the lion part, with this colour. And I'm also just going to put a little bit on the beak as well. So I'm using the same colour for the beak, but we're going to tone the beak up to make it a lighter colour a little bit later. So this is just going to be used as a very base tone for the beak. You don't have to be too careful just yet. These are just the base colours at the moment. And from there we're moving on to the feathers, and with the feathers I'm going to use on this particular GRYPH HOUND that I'm painting, I'm using an Army Painter Hydra Turquoise colour. This is one of my favourite colours from Army Painter. This is a really lovely colour, and this colour really pops on the miniature. It should stand out quite nicely against that yellow, so it should give us a little bit of like realism followed by a little bit of fantasy, and give it like a really good sort of contrast between really bright colours and sort of a normal kind of colour as well. So from there I'm also just going to paint a little bit across the armour, and for this I'm going to use gold, using a Retributor armour from Citadel. This is the most common sort of gold colour that you would probably be used to using if you paint your Stormcast, because Stormcast normally gets seen as gold or using gold armour, and Retributor armour is normally the colour that you would use to be painting that. So this should tie your miniature in with your normal everyday Stormcast army, and the army that you probably paint in if you're a Stormcast user. So I'm just being very careful not to get the gold onto any of the turquoise, and just take your time and go through. Once I've done that, I'm just going to paint the leather straps. Now the leather straps are a little bit awkward, but this is the tie-in point that just sits in between that fantasy blue, that bright blue feathers, and the yellow of the sort of lionish body that we've got at the back. So for this I'm using a Vallejo Dark Rust. That's one of my go-to colours, which you'd be used to if you follow any of my other videos. If not, Dark Rust is pretty much just like a Citadel Dryad bark. You could also use something like a Rhinox hide. That's the same kind of thing. Ideally what we're using is a really dark brown just as a base colour for this. Try to be very careful, or try to be as careful as possible when painting the strap, because you can end up with getting some of the dark colour onto the bits that you've already painted, but you could tidy that up as you go along anyway. Now from there I'm just going to paint a few of the little silver bits, so the Stormcast hammer here, so the symbol, and I'm also going to make sure to paint the I want to say latches for the belt. Oh, the buckles, there we go. So we're just going to paint the belt buckles themselves as well. So where we've got those leather straps, we're just going to try to catch that with the silver. Now you can use any silver you like. For me, the Army Painter have got a few really nice silvers. Plate mail metal is quite bright already to start with, and when you tone that up a little bit later, it really pops. It makes your miniature stand out quite a lot. So I'm using the plate mail metal at the moment just to go round and paint the silver where I would like it. Just like so. For the final sort of base colour, what I'm just going to do is use a Vallejo Bone White. So this is a cream colour, so a very sort of creamy sort of white colour. I'm just going to go across the claws and the nails and things like that, across the feet. Being quite a cream colour allows a little bit more room in terms of toning that back up, whereas if you paint something just straight flat white, it becomes more difficult to tone that white back up from anything, because you're already starting at a really light point. So by starting with a cream colour instead, it allows you then to tone up to white as you sort of build up the highlighting. So from there we're going to move on and try to make a little bit more of a sort of like sort of an animalistic leopard print or something like that we're going to go. So what we're going to try and do is just using a flat earth from Vallejo. I'm just using quite a big large sort of like a little bit of a larger brush with a wider area at the end, because what I'm doing is I'm just dabbing this to create sort of ununiformed spots, if that makes sense. So you don't want the spots to look exactly circular or anything like that, because it's supposed to be like a natural pattern. So I'm just dabbing quite large drops of thin down paint, as you see. I'm just going to allow that to dry and then move on and build a pattern around it. But for this I'm using flat earth from Vallejo, and as you can see I'm just trying to use that thick edge of the brush to just dab, like I say, ununiformed random sort of splodges here and there. For this, when you're painting these random splodges, you don't have to be exact or precise, you don't need to put them in a specific set or pattern. As you can see, I'm being quite random with it, and that will create an element. When you're being quite random like this, it will create that element or that illusion of it being a little bit more natural, because the natural world doesn't make things perfect or exact. When you've got sort of animals and you check the animal patterns, they are quite random and they are a little bit more unique. So as you see, I'm just placing this over in loads of different areas. So once you've waited for that to dry, what I'm going to do then is just using the Vallejo Dark Rust, just painting around sort of 3 of the 4 edges, and again this is just dabbing, so this is just dabbing the tip of the brush, and I'm trying to paint this around 3 out of 4 of the edges of the like sort of creating a small square around the splodges that I've made. So as you see, I'm just painting little bits either side and a little bit here and there, because when you check sort of leopard print, it is quite it is like a two-tone, but it's almost like you've got sort of dark bits either side with a lighter bit in the middle and things like that, or at least that's how I've seen it, and that's how I've painted this particular model. Makes painting sort of patterns like this quite simple, is when you can be quite natural and quite free-flowing, you know, so you don't have to be, like I say, exact, precise, or following a specific pattern. You can just go free-flowing and have a lot of fun by painting in this sort of way as well. So just try to do that around all of the different splodges that you've made, and tidy up little bits if you want. You can make these patterns as thick as you like, as thin as you like. You can make them quite large, or you can make them really, really small if you wanted it to be a little bit more accurate, or a little bit more sort of like sort of detailed. But for this model it's quite small anyway, so I'm not too worried. I'm just going to paint the little pads underneath, because you've got to paint the cat's little beans. So I'm painting those with a Vallejo Squid Pink, as everyone likes little cat paws. So you've got to paint that with a little bit of Squid Pink as well, and make a little pink paw underneath, look. And from there, one of my favourite parts, which is just painting the wash. I love painting a wash onto a miniature, because it really does show the deeper areas, the recessed areas. It shows the details and what you can build up from then, so it gives you quite a lot that you can work with. And for this one I'm using a Game Wash Sepia. Now recently I've picked up a large tub, so it's a 200ml bottle of dip-in formula, which is a Vallejo Sepia wash, and this is a really, really cool wash. This is very, very cool to work with, because you can literally plaster this on your miniature and it dries fantastically well, and it creates a real nice level of depth. It works with a really good range of colours as well, ranging from sort of yellows to browns and all things like that. So once it's dry, it will look like this, and that wash will dry into a sort of matte effect as well. So then that allows you to build your colours back up. So what I'm going to do then is look at the areas where the shade hasn't sat, and we're going back to that Vallejo gold brown, so back to that yellow base colour, and then we're just following those lines and building the tones up. Now I've sped this up just so that you can see quite a lot of the way that I'm painting the colours on this one, so that it gives you an idea as to how the brushwork or the way that I use my brush when I'm painting a lot of this. A lot of this is mostly just sort of following those lines and painting up the areas that are sticking out the most. And what you don't want to do is don't go back over the pattern. that we've made, so those splodges and the patterns that we've made, we're going to leave that as they are, but we're just going to tidy little bits up around them when we're painting this yellow, as you can see. And the more that you paint this, you can put this in multiple layers, because with yellow, the good thing is yellow doesn't take to the miniature immediately. So yellow colours tend to be a little bit more see-through, they tend to take more coats, so this gives you more freedom to play about with the base, then go up again for a highlight. Or build that layer up so that it becomes a little bit more vibrant. And the more layers you do, the more vibrant it becomes. And you can also mix like a lighter colour into it as well to create a highlighted, vibrant layer. But that's entirely up to you. For this particular painting, I'm only sticking to the one colour that we're going up from. And I used it in 2 layers so that I got the vibrancy up to the level that I wanted for the bodywork. Now, by using these short, quick brush strokes, as you can see, in some ways the pattern then does almost look like I'm painting fur, which is great because we want this to be, like I say, kind of like the leopard or the lion, so you kind of want to build these little sort of subtle hints to the way that the brush strokes work, to the way that the colours are going, so that it builds that element or that illusion that there's fur on the miniature as well, which is cool. Because you're getting a lot more work out of your brush strokes and a lot more work out of your painting than it looks. You know, it looks like your painting effort is quite small, so you're not doing too much work on the painting, but then when you look back when the miniature dries, it looks like you've done a lot more, or like you've worked a lot more for that effort as well. Which is great, which is what you always want, because you want your miniatures to stand out on the table, to look cool, but you also don't want to spend forever painting them, especially if you're painting a full army, because when you're painting a full army, there's nothing worse than spending like 3-4 days painting every single model when you have literally about 100-200 different models. If they're for display, that's a completely different thing, because you obviously want to spend as much time as possible getting them to look as good as you possibly can, so you can build them up and go up as many layers as you like. Now, once I finish with the yellow, I'm going to go back to the army painter, the Hydra Turquoise. I'm just using a very light dry brush of the Hydra Turquoise here, just to build that vibrancy back up, because we've lost a little bit with the shade, so we're just going to dry brush around, trying to be as careful as possible. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the very tip of the brush to paint that blue back in around the face, because we don't want to dry brush into that crease, into that little gap, because it's not going to give us, it's not going to be accurate enough, or it's not going to be controlled enough, and we don't want to get that turquoise, that blue colour, onto the armour. So I'm just going to paint the face in, and that'll give us a little bit more character as well, out of the frown and the eyes and things like that. And then with the beak, as I said earlier, we were going to use the gold brown as the base, and then we're going to build up from there. So what I'm using for this is a Vallejo moon yellow, which is a much lighter yellow, and I'm going to follow, as you see with my brush strokes, I'm going to follow along the lines and the pattern of the beak. So I'm going to follow the beak in certain lines, so that allows the brush strokes to follow that, which will create, again, you know, like I was saying earlier about like a little bit of a furry element on the body. This now will allow the beak to look a little bit sharper around the edges, because we're following that pattern, as you see. And as it dries then, as you can see, we've just left a little hint then of some of the shaded areas around the nostril and around the mouth and things like that. And from there, I'm going to use a Vallejo leather brown on the leather straps. And what I do for this, as you can see, I'm just using thin brush strokes, and I'm just making crisscrosses. So just kind of cross-hatching, crisscross, crisscross across the leather, because at the moment, a lot of people are painting sort of battered leather effects. And a lot of people want to know, how do you paint battered leather effects and things like that. And probably the easiest way to do it is to make sure that your paint isn't too thin, like that blob that I've just placed there. And just using the very tip of your brush, just paint in these very, very thin crisscross lines, crisscross lines. By doing these crisscross lines, it gives the element of the leather is battered, worn, scratched, and things like that. And the thinner the layer, the thinner the paint that you do with these crisscrosses, the more worn and the more sort of realistic and the more battered that this leather will look. And again, you can use multiple layers of different highlights if you like, but I'm not for this. I'm going to keep things nice and simple, nice and easy. So in the same way that we used the bone white originally on the claws, now we're going back with a layer of Elfric flesh, and this is like bone white but a highlighted version, so this is the next step up. And what that allows us to do is to make these claws really, really stand out then. So we've used the base coat of bone white, used the shade to darken it, and then highlighting it back up with the Alfric Flesh. Doesn't get any easier than that for doing claws and teeth and things like that. It's such a simple formula, but it looks and works so good. Just be careful when you're painting the claws so that you don't get the paint into the grooves in between and things like that. So as I said earlier about the silver, we used the plate mail metal as the base, and I'm just going to go around that and just hit some of the really sort of corners and the edges and make some scratchy sort of effects on the hammer and things like that as well. Using an army painter again, but this is a shining silver, so this is the perfect step up, this is the perfect sort of highlight to that plate mail metal, and again making this pop, making this a little bit more fantasy, a little bit more colourful, so it's not drab and dreary, it's really bright and colourful, and yeah, it's going to look awesome. So there we go. Pretty much done. I'm just going to use a final stage of the Citadel Retributor armor, just across the armor as well, but I'm just dry brushing this ever so slightly. And the danger with doing this, as you can see when I'm dry brushing, is that it will leave a little bit of that dry brush around the eyebrows that we've painted, so you will need to go back with your Hydra Turquoise and just tidy up those little eyebrows and just tidy up the face a little. And once you're done, that's how we should look. You should have a nice, easy, cool, quick painted GRYPH HOUND that has a lot of character, a little bit of fantasy thrown in with a little bit of realism, and it should be a cool contrast. I hope that this video helped you, and I hope that you take something from it, and as always, thank you very much for watching.